So we'll have a little more study of this week's amazing Parsha. This week during our daily minyan, where we have a Devar Torah every morning, David Block raised a very interesting question that I want to delve into even more. We only spent a few minutes on it, but he asked the key question and offered one answer. I want to take his answer and then develop it. The review by Moses of everything that happened in the past is a review, reflection, and interpretation, right? So when we see a contradiction, we can say, okay, different traditions, or we can say different perspective, and we really don't know. We just know that the editor decided to include different versions, which could be different reflections rather than different versions. So one of the key things is, and starts with number 1, 3:26. Moses is talking to the people, and he says, "But the Lord was wrathful with me on your account and would not listen to me. The Lord said to me, 'Enough, never speak to me of this matter again.'" So what's the matter? What are they talking about? When God said to Moses, "You're not entering the land of Israel because you hit the rock instead of speaking to it, and first of all, you showed anger, you showed an attitude towards the people in which you showed no love. In fact, you insulted them, you called them rebels, and it made it look like you brought the water. So instead of showing that God brought the water, you almost made yourself look like a god, like a magician. So you're not going into the land of Israel." But how does Moses remember that story? "The Lord was wrathful with me on your account, your fault. He got mad at me because of you." Now, does Moses not remember he's the one who hit the rock? No, he does remember, but now he's interpreting. So the first thing we understand is the interpretation is rather simple. We see it all the time. Someone makes a mistake, particularly a politician, or they do something, it's never their fault. The other guy did it. The guy before me did it. It's his fault. That's why we're in this situation. It has nothing to do with me. I may be in power, but it has nothing to do with me. He did it. She did it. And we do that all the time. We make a mistake, it's their fault. Moses would not accept the responsibility. Now, on a certain level, it was their fault. Why? Because they wouldn't stop complaining. They drove him crazy. Not enough water. We don't like the taste of the food. The manna is boring. We're going to get killed here. Complained about everything. And he finally couldn't take it anymore, and he exploded. So yes, if they had been beautiful, wonderful followers, a great community that did everything he asked and praised him, he wouldn't have lost his cool. But that never happens. Leaders have to deal with realities, and he couldn't deal with it at that moment. God said, "You're done. You're not going to be able to lead the people into the land of Israel." So the first thing we learn is that Moses is a leader, or anyone. You can't blame everybody else for that which you've done. You have to accept there's accountability, a word that's disappeared in our culture now, accountability. It's always, remember the comedian, "Devil made me do it," right? Flip Wilson was his name, right? And we laughed about it, right? Because he didn't mean it. But people do mean it now. Nobody's responsible for any of their behavior. Somebody else made me do it. So that's the first thing that we learn. But here's an interesting thing. This is what David pointed out. Look at chapter 4:21. "Now the Lord was angry with me on your account," same thing, right? "And swore that I should not cross the Jordan and enter the good land that the Lord your God is assigning you as a heritage. For I must die in the land. I shall not cross the Jordan, but you will cross and take possession of that good land." Okay, he said it's the same thing. A chapter later, and he can't give it up. He just can't remember? He goes back to the same, okay, but here's the key that we missed. Who's he talking to here? Who are these people standing ready to enter the land of Israel? Were they the same people who were standing when he hit the rock? No, they're all dead, right? They died in the desert. Who are these people? The kids. So if I was making a movie, if I was a director, I'd have Moses screaming at them, and then I'd have the kids looking around. Who's he talking to? Right? What's he talking about? Oh, it's an interesting story. I wasn't there. How can it be on my account? I wasn't even there, right? So what do we see here? Moses is living in the past. He can't give up that moment. He can't get it out of his mind. It has haunted him for 40 years. And he's so upset, understandably, because it was his life's wish, that he's screaming at people who have nothing to do with it. You can't live in the past if you're a leader. You can't. You can remember the past and learn something from it, but if you're going to live in the past, okay, he did it. He's gone. What are you talking to me about? What he did. First of all, you're the leader. You're accountable. Fix it. And stop living in the past. We want the present dealt with so we can build a better future. So it's an incredible lesson about Moses' failure as a leader, right? We see it because we're hearing him voice his anger. It's your fault, and I can't forget that moment. Well, if you can't forget that moment, then you can't go into the future with the people. You can't lead them because you're living in the past. So we learn two more reasons why Moses can't go into the land of Israel, but we empathize with him because we remember how difficult those people were. But as a leader, he dealt with them at a certain point in his life, and then he couldn't deal with it anymore, and that was the end of his leadership. Now, one other thing from this week's Parsha that's also a very important lesson, number 3, chapter 4, verses 6 and 8. Observe them, they're talking about the laws and teachings, faithfully, for that will be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other peoples, who on hearing all these laws will say, surely that great nation is a wise and discerning people. For what great nation is there that has a God so close at hand, as is the Lord your God, whenever we call upon him? So Moses here is explaining, why will people look at you and say you're wise and discerning? Because of your Torah, because of these laws, because of the society you're going to create based upon the instruction in this Torah. If you create that society, they're going to look at you and say, what an incredibly wise and discerning people. What he didn't realize, of course, they're also going to look at you and be so jealous they're going to hate you, right? Or wise and discerning and just, we're not interested in justice, we're not interested in fairness, we're interested in ruling, right? With a very, very strong, powerful hand. So you're a bad example because your people might want that, right? Which leads us to remember, why did communism, why was it so important to them to kill the Bible, right? Why is it so important for certain political groups to remove religion? Get it out of here. Why? Well, the Soviet Union did not want people sitting there reading about a story in which a people rose up against a dictator who enslaved them and succeeded in leaving slavery and going to freedom. That's the last story they want, a dictator wants you to hear. So Castro forbade the Bible, and Mao Zedong forbade all those teachings, not that the Chinese had a Bible, right? And Russia knew the greatest danger to their communist dictatorship was the story of Exodus from the Bible. Because they may get the idea, if the Hebrews went free from Pharaoh, we can go free from our Pharaoh, right? Which was the Communist Party. That was Pharaoh. And that's exactly, how did the Soviet Jewry movement begin? It began when the book of Exodus, not this book of Exodus, Leon Uris's book of Exodus, right? It was a great movie too, right? So when that book was smuggled into the Soviet Union and the Jews started to read it, they said, oh my God, this whole thing is a lie. They lied to us. They lied to us about who we are as Jews, how Israel came into being. They lied to us about our tradition. And so they started to dig, and then they started to study Bible, and they started to smuggle books in that taught them the truth. And they realized Communist Party is Pharaoh, and we need a Moses. And Moses was the Soviet Jewry movement, led by great, great political leaders in America, as well as Jewish leaders. And we had everybody. We had, across the board, supported us in Soviet Jewry. The biggest political leaders that led the Soviet Jewry movement weren't even Jewish. Scoop Jackson, right? People say he's doing for the Jewish vote. Yeah, the Jewish vote in Washington State, that was a really big deal for Scoop Jackson. All 8 of them voted for him, right? So he did it because he had been in, I forget which camp, it may have been Bergen-Belsen, I don't remember, but he was in the army when they liberated a camp, and he said, I will never let the Jews, this happen again. And he became a staunch supporter of Soviet Jewry. So what we learn here is the reason that the Jewish people can claim a place in history of leadership by setting an example is not because we're Jewish, it's because we have a society based upon Torah. If we don't have a society based upon Torah, then we're not a wise and discerning people. Why should anybody pay attention to us? All right? So I just want to give you now, I wanted to print it out so you could take it home, examples of non-Jews who were very strong in their Bible studies and knew history and how they interpreted in their period of time the role of the Jewish people based upon this verse that the Jewish people were especially wise and discerning because of their Torah. So the first one is number 4. The Jews are a people who've done much more to civilize the world than any other people. Heinrich Heine, right? From Germany. I think 1800s that would be. Notice the word civilized, right? It was a war against paganism. It was a war against the sick cultures of the Canaanites and the worshippers of death, the Egyptians. It says the Jews civilized the world. He means that Jews' Torah civilized the world. Number 5, the Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. John Adams. All our founders were biblicists. They all knew the Bible. They quoted the Bible. They saw themselves as redeeming the people from Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the king of England, right? Ben Franklin wanted the motto of America to be the splitting of the Red Sea. He didn't win, but it was a nice idea. So here we have John Adams, who realizes from his biblical studies that it's the Bible that civilized the world. And he credits the Jews with bringing the Bible to the world. Number 6, he, the Jew, has made a marvelous fight in the world in all the ages, has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persians rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they're gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now or have vanished. The Jews saw them all, beat them all, and is now where he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal, but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? The secret of his mortality goes back to what Moses said in Deuteronomy. It's the wisdom of the Torah that guides the Jew. I didn't put who said it, but I'm pretty sure some of you know. That was Mark Twain. That was a quote from Mark Twain, okay? What is the secret of his immortality? And he sees it as the Bible, which the Jews used to civilize the world and to maintain themselves against all the other nations, because when they went away from those teachings, they eventually collapsed as civilizations and disappeared from the face of the earth. So Deuteronomy has a lot to teach us about leadership, the importance of accepting responsibility and not trying to push it off on other people, the importance of living in the present and not always harping on the past. Such leaders are going to fail. And second of all, that the Jewish people's endurance and the fact that we are immortal as a nation comes from our gift of the Torah that we have found to guide us and to offer it to the world. And what you have today, really, again, is Israel representing the Jewish people, fighting against the evil of terror, and other parts of civilization, lock, stock, and barrel with terror. Russia's with Iran, they're with Hamas, It's clear. We understand where they stand in this world. They stand on the side of evil and dominance and dictatorial reign. And on the other hand, you have Western civilization, which watches, doesn't interfere too much, doesn't help too much, kind of in the middle, hoping for Israel to win against terror, but not willing to actually jump in and help. It's kind of being on the sidelines because Western civilization is really confused about where it stands and what it is. Do we want Bible? Do we want not Bible? We want 10 Commandments. We don't want 10 Commandments. We want to defeat radical Islam. No, we want to compromise the radical. They're not sure. And so the Jew, once again, takes up the leadership and says the Torah is very clear. Terror is evil. Uvi'arta hara mikirbecha. You must remove the evil from your midst. There's no talk about compromise with evil. There's only talk about removing evil from our midst. Good lessons from the book of Devarim, good lessons from Moses, reviewing his life and continuing to be who he's always been, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher.